You are listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you, recorded every week in Pasadena, California, before a live audience. Thanks for tuning in. All right. Thanks, Max. Oh, I got it. I got it. Okay. Thanks. Here's yours. So here we are, entering the third week of this war with an excursion, I've heard it being called as well, which is unbelievable. And it's come to light that some U.S. military commanders are telling their troops not to worry because this is a holy war and a necessary war to usher in the second coming of Christ. I wish I was kidding about that, but I'm not. They're saying this war was prophesied about in the scriptures, and they're doing the Lord's work in killing Iranians because it's what needs to happen in order to bring Jesus back. I don't know how widespread this is, but apparently it's been verified as happening in different corners of the military and the Pentagon. I don't think this is the main reason why we're in Iran, why we started this war, but I think it's part of it because of the enormous influence evangelicals have over the leadership of our government. And this isn't a new belief. These ideas have been around for a very, very long time. Christians have interpreted Islam within their end times apocalyptic framework since the inception of Islam in the 7th century. It was seen even back then as a demonic force to be eradicated and defeated. The Crusades, which took place in the 11th, 12th, and 13th century, were in part motivated by this belief that overcoming Islamic control of the Holy Land was necessary in order to usher in the second coming of Christ. During the Reformation era, now we're talking about the 16th century, Martin Luther and other early Protestant reformers believed that the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, were in fact agents of the Antichrist. And then, of course, with the rise of evangelicalism and fundamentalism in the 20th century in the United States, correlating with the formation of the modern nation state of Israel in 1949, you have this idea of an end times battle between Islam on one side and Israel and the United States on the other. This idea really took off in the 20th century. So there has been a 1,400-year history, 1,400-year history of Christians incorporating in their eschatology a cataclysmic end times battle with Islam that is supposedly necessary in order to usher in the second coming of Christ, this messianic age. And Islam, too, in some segments of the faith, hold a similar eschatology, although with them winning the Battle of Armageddon, of course, and thereby ushering in their version of a messianic era. But this kind of eschatology is a seminary word for things having to do with the last things, the end times, the coming age. This kind of eschatology for all three faiths, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, is obviously deeply destructive and scary, especially in a nuclear-armed world like ours. And it's on full display today in the United States, as is this kind of anti-Muslim sentiment. Just this week, a Republican congressman from Tennessee, Andy Ogles, said in a social media post, "Muslims don't belong in American society, period." That's an astonishing thing for a sitting member of Congress, a member of U.S. House of Representatives, to just post online and, keep his job, not be censored. But this is where we're at today. And just last month, another Republican congressman, Randy Fine from Florida, said, if they force us to choose between dogs and Muslims, the choice is not a difficult one. This is astonishing. I mean, not really. They're just finally saying the quiet part out loud, right? This mentality, this anti-Muslim sentiment, this racism actually too, has been simmering underneath the surface of Christianity for centuries. Even the U.S. ambassador to Israel Huckabee, Reverend Mike Huckabee, mind you. He's an evangelical Christian pastor, just the guy you want in that position, right? He recently said, it would be fine if Israel took all the land, meaning all the land from essentially the Nile Delta in Egypt to the Tigris and Euphrates River in Iraq. I mean, this is insane. He's talking about the displacement and, of course, the death of countless people in Egypt, Jordan, Iraq. This is insane. But this is the way Christian Zionists and fundamentalists think, because they're trying to bring Jesus back. And there's tens of millions of them in America today who think like this. This is not some tiny niche of America. I know it may seem impossible that tens of millions of modern people living in the United States with access to the internet and smartphones, modern people, think this way, but they do. Tens of millions of them. And I used to be one of them. This is the way I grew up. I grew up being taught and believing this stuff. I was an end times guy. I was fascinated by it. So it's not just this fringe idea, and it's been around for centuries in one form or another. But that's not the only myth I want to dispel and deconstruct this morning. There's another myth having to do with Christian perceptions of Iran and Islam. This myth is more subtle, but it's still really problematic. And it's the myth of Christian and European exceptionalism. This is this is AP church this morning. This is kind of this is going to be like a college level class a little bit this morning for the next few minutes. Bear with me, okay? I think it's important that when I was at Fuller Seminary, I was convinced sitting in classrooms that people at church need to hear this stuff. You need to hear some history here this morning. I want to deconstruct and dispel this myth of Christian and European exceptionalism, which is this belief that our religion of Christianity, our sacred text, the Bible, and our European Christian history is morally superior to Islam's history and Islamic beliefs and their sacred text, the Quran. And the reason why this myth goes on, the reason why we're not a violent, repressive nation like Iran is because we are a Christian nation, or at least a nation informed by European Christian values and the Bible. Have you heard this myth before? I think this is a myth even a lot of centrist and progressive Christians believe in on some level, but it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of history. The fact is, Christianity, prior to the Age of Enlightenment, so prior to the 17th and 18th century, was incredibly repressive, imperialistic, and violent. If you've studied church history, you know this. The church, generally speaking, over the course of its history, has not been morally superior to anybody or anything. So it's hard to argue that there's something intrinsic about Christianity or intrinsic about the Bible that makes the church morally superior to other religions, now or then. Now, don't get me wrong. There's lots of great things in the Bible, lots of great messages about love and justice, but let's be clear, there's lots of misogyny in there. Oh yeah. There's God ordering genocide. There's all kinds of violence and intolerance, right? It's a mixed bag. Our religion, if you are a Christian, and it's like all religions, it's a mixed bag, and one has to thoughtfully discern what to take and what to leave behind. But the church and all of Western civilization changed dramatically for the better in the 17th and 18th century because of what's called the Enlightenment. This was a broad intellectual, political, and scientific movement that occurred in Western Europe. In short, and I'm going to be as brief as possible in my description of it, it was based on the conviction that reason and science triumphs over tradition, superstition, and religious authority. Reason and knowledge were seen as things that were inherently ennobling and virtuous to acquire. Educating oneself, being a person of reason and rationality, these were seen as deeply, deeply virtuous things. The Enlightenment also valued this idea that the individual should have the freedom to decide for themselves what to believe and think, rather than to have some higher authority like a monarch or the church dictate it to them. Tradition does not define reality anymore. These are core Enlightenment concepts and ideals. And it's what led to the American and French revolutions. And it gave us the notion of liberty and individual rights and self-governance and separation of church and state, etc. These are good things. These are good things. So contrary to popular belief, Christianity and the Bible did not give us our so-called American values of liberty and justice for all. The Enlightenment did. Christianity and the Bible did not give us the idea of civil liberties and democracy. The Enlightenment did. Christianity and the Bible did not give us the idea of the separation of church and state. The Enlightenment did. In fact, the Enlightenment was largely a reaction against the church. The European Enlightenment was largely a reaction against the church, not a church-led project. America, therefore, was founded on Enlightenment values, not biblical and Christian values. That's a very important myth to dispel. Now, some of the founders, yes, like Washington, Adams, Madison, Hamilton, Jefferson, a lot of these guys were Christians, but not traditional Christians, or what we would call, certainly not what we would call evangelical Christians today. They were culturally Christian. They were deists, a lot of them, meaning they believed in a kind of distant, impersonal God, sort of a divine watchmaker who set things in motion, but he's an absentee landlord. That's how they understood it. But they believed that faith and religion had a place in society, but only to reinforce basic morality. They were very keen on keeping religion at bay. Again, because they grew up in Europe during the Enlightenment. That's where they were from. So the Bible and Christianity were not the foundations of our nation. The Enlightenment was. And what drove the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century Europe was a convergence of numerous complex factors that time will not allow us to explore in depth, but I will mention that Muslim scholarship played a role. It was Muslim scholarship discovered during and after the Crusades that laid the foundation for both the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment. It was Muslim astronomy, Muslim math, and particularly ancient Greek and Roman texts that Muslims had preserved and translated into Arabic that were vital to both the Renaissance and Enlightenment. And that's because ancient Greek and Roman writings championed these ideas of reason, rationalism, the rule of law, representative democracy, and other Enlightenment ideals. So Muslim scholarship played a pretty big role in the Renaissance and Enlightenment, and that doesn't get talked about a lot. But it was also the presence of a wealthy middle class in Europe at that time, 17th, 18th century. The Enlightenment was largely driven by the rise of an urban, literate, merchant middle class that competed for power against the monarchs and the aristocracy and the church. And where did a lot of that middle class wealth come from? Anybody want to take a guess? Colonialism. Without the wealth generated from colonialism in the New World, meaning without the extraction of resources from the Americas and the exploitation and enslavement of its native population, and of course the African slave trade going on at that time too, you don't get this broad, wealthy middle class in 17th to 18th century Europe, which in turn gave them the power and the resources necessary to work out and implement these Enlightenment ideas. The irony here should be really striking. The Enlightenment was made possible in large part by a very unenlightened thing called colonialism. And let's remember, the church played a big role in helping the European powers colonize the New World and subjugate its native population. They came with the sword in one hand and the cross in the other, right? If you know your history. For me, this really kills this myth of Christian and European exceptionalism and our moral superiority to, the rest of the world. But notice this relationship between wealth, liberalism, and secularism. And by liberalism, I don't mean left-leaning politics. I mean this idea of civil liberties, individual rights. That's actually what liberalism really means. But notice this connection between wealth, liberalism, and secularism. It's not to say that wealthy people everywhere are always liberal and secular. Obviously not. We all know rich conservatives. But numerous studies today have shown that there is a correlation between a community's socioeconomic status and the level of religiosity and fundamentalism present. It's not a coincidence that the poorest states in our union are also the most religious and fundamentalist. That is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the wealthiest nations in the world, meaning the nations with the highest standards of living for their middle class, like, say, Scandinavia, tend to be pretty secular and liberal. That's not a coincidence. Generally speaking, the more financially stable and secure one is, the less likely one is to be a religious extremist. In other words, individuals and societies tend to be fundamentalists not because they're inherently irrational and immoral, but because they're struggling to survive, and they lack the resources and security necessary to outgrow these fundamentalist concepts of God. You know, religion, especially fundamentalist religion, it's really powerful stuff because it offers a story of justice where there is no justice. It offers community and connection in places where other institutions have failed. It offers, hope and a sense of security when the world feels utterly threatening and chaotic. Fundamentalist religion thrives in those environments and in those populations. And it's understandable and okay to a certain extent that religion is there to meet those needs and to empower people and to give them hope in otherwise hopeless circumstances. Some of that's great. But the more people feel like their needs are being met, the more sense of physical security they have, the more resources they have access to, the more education they have access to, the less likely they are to turn towards these nonsensical and pernicious forms of faith and spirituality and the psychos and the charlatans who hawk them. With regards to Iran and Islam, for me, this means Islam is not fundamentally to blame for why Iran is governed by a bunch of murderous religious nuts. And it is governed by a bunch of murderous religious nuts. I'm not saying Islam doesn't have its problems. All religions do. Christianity certainly does, as I've outlined this morning. But with regards to Islam, I'll leave its problems up to the Muslim scholars and the greater Muslim community to address. They're far more knowledgeable about their own tradition and history than I am. And I think it's important to recognize that some Muslim majority countries today, like in Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, have embraced secular governance, and civil liberties to a great degree. But I'll stay in my lane this morning and focus today on my own tradition and my own history and how we might be able to stop the fundamentalists over here from taking over and bringing about the end of the world in the hopes of bringing Jesus back. Because that's happening. Not that Jesus is coming back, but that they're trying to do it this way. They seem to want to turn back the clock and make us like medieval Europe again. Make America medieval again should be their slogan. Make America medieval again. Sounds great. So much for the Enlightenment, right? These Christian nationalists and these end-time fanatics are basically trying to undo the Enlightenment. They don't like that reason and science triumphs over theology and tradition. They do not like that. They don't like that secular law has displaced religious law. They don't like the separation of church and state. Not really. They want full access. They want to mandate theology into legislation. We know this. A lot of us grew up this way. This is not a secret. I'm talking about tens of millions of Americans who think this way. So we got our work cut out for us over here. Let's focus on this. We got our own problems. All right, that's my uplifting talk for this morning. Yeah, and as always, we want to open it up for dialogue and discussion, points of disagreement, reflections. I thought about maybe coming up with I don't know, like a discussion question, but I couldn't think of a good one. But I don't know. Anybody have anything they want to say this morning about all this? Did you grow up the way I grew up, being taught end times philosophy or end times? You did, Julie? Did you want to?
Yeah. I I don't remember this as well as I wish I did, but not only did I grow up with you know, parents who talked about the the end times in the Middle East, but grandparents as well. And I was remembered during your talk that my grandpa, who I really loved, he was like a gentle, sweet man. And he wrote a book about the end times and Israel's role in the end times. And it had something to do with the, sorry, the key part of this is that he asked me to type it into the computer for him.
Okay.
And so I have all of this like in me, like I wrote it, all this nonsense about something about how the it's like prophesied that the Israeli Navy cannot be defeated, like says God.
Yeah. There's
Um
all kinds of things like that.
and it was just a lot of it was a interpretation of Revelation, and that this is how the world will end, is a great conflagration of forces in the Middle East. And it makes it so that when stuff like the current war happens, like I'm a little scared that 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 prophecy is so deep in me that I haven't been able to completely root it out. I have to constantly deconstruct the thoughts as they come.
Yeah.
Um, even though I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I don't believe that we bring Jesus back by killing one another. That's kind of nuts to me. I had a question though for you, Aaron, because I'm just wondering how you would figure this in. I loved what you said about like the more financially stable people are, the more likely they are to be secular, or maybe the more likely the more unlikely they are to run to religion as like an escape.
Yeah, like an
Um
unhealthy kind of approach,
yeah,
right?
and I'm thinking about, and you mentioned like Sweden or whatever, and I'm thinking highly socialist, right? So there's
Mhm.
a great deal of sharing in a way in a society like that. So I would imagine that the whatever wealth you have feels different than it does
Mm,
here in the States. Because my question is like, again, I'm thinking about my dad who reads the Bible through capitalism,
yeah.
basically. And I think that the other point is that when you have quite a bit, maybe more than you need, that really affects your theology too. Maybe not necessarily doesn't make you fundamental, but I'm thinking about all the people in this country who are holding on to a certain theology because it helps them feel okay
Mm,
about the theft and exploitation that's at the root of that wealth.
yeah. Yeah, well, capitalism certainly is a kind of religion. It's a kind of belief in, the god of capitalism is the so-called free market and
Yeah.
this meritocracy that we live in, and, this god hands out rewards and punishments based upon one's one's performance in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
And it's all powerful and it's all knowing, and I think for a lot of American Christians, their theology is fundamentally capitalism. And the God that they believe in, even though they do believe in an actual like supreme being, but the God is remarkably capitalistic, and it's kind of like it's really kind of
Yeah.
a big other symbol for capitalism itself in a lot of ways. Yeah,
Yeah. So
and
I was just thinking, like, it seems like also in this country, the more financially stable you are, like if you have in excess, that also drives a kind of unhealthy theology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking in generalities.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's complex and
Yeah.
there's exceptions, but again, I think if we look at the poorest states in the Union, they
Yeah.
tend to be not just red, but
Oh,
they
yeah.
tend to be overtly religious. You find more fundamentalism there. Struggling
Yeah.
communities historically without hope or without access to resources tend to turn to more fundamentalist, pernicious forms
Yeah.
of Christianity for that strength, for
For
what
sure.
they're not getting in the rest of their life,
Yeah.
to make up for the deep lack of security and hope they have in their material circumstances.
Yeah.
So they're told, just believe this, come to this church, tithe into our coffers. God will meet all your needs. We'll meet all,
Yeah.
that absolutely is a social psychological dynamic at work
Yeah.
in struggling communities, historically and present.
Yeah.
But yes, it's more complex and there's exceptions.
Yeah.
Find lots of rich Christians who are, deeply conservative theologically
Yeah.
as well. Absolutely, you do.
Yeah. Yeah, and those folks are in a lot of cases manipulating
Yeah.
the poor
Yeah.
who
Sure.
turn to
It's
fundamentalism.
complex. I'm
Yeah.
speaking in generalities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. Somebody else. What is a spark for you? Oh, go ahead, Vanessa. If you're willing to speak into the mic, it's for our podcast.
I'm just piggybacking on you. Maybe it's not so much about individual financial security, but the makeup of the community around it. So I'm thinking the wider gap there is in wealth, especially here in the United States, I see that, those who kind of are hoarding the wealth in these poorer communities tend to be way more fundamental and in their religious beliefs. But in some of these more socialist, I guess, communities like we were talking about in Europe, the gap isn't as big, right? So it is more of an equal footing, a more shared community of resources and wealth. I think there's something about, and I think it goes back to like the god of capitalism, right? Where if you find that you have been successful at the game of capitalism and have made your mark and created your wealth, there is less of a tendency to want to then share it with the rest of your community. And seeing that as like, well, God gave me the strength and the ability to build my life up to this. And so others should do that as well. And if they just put their faith in God, right, and themselves and build this and worked harder by the grace of God, they too will be successful and like me. I'm from Texas, and I see that so much in the communities in Texas, where there is not this like willingness for the church to really support its members in a real like monetary tangible way. Well, come to church, we might have some things to donate or whatever, but you're having a difficult time paying your medical bills. Well, we'll pray for you.
Right.
We'll pray for you. And so I think part of it has to do with capitalism and that big gap.
Yeah.
In wealth. Does that make?
Yeah. Thank you.
You
Good
know
stuff.
what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you. Sharing on your first Sunday here. I love it. What's that? That's awesome. You're in the right place. Somebody else today. Yeah, Jose.
I also can't help but talk.
Yeah.
It's such a like American Christianity is such an interesting. I mean, maybe it's more Western, but it feels like it's specifically American Christianity has gotten so conflated with capitalism, and it's such a beast to
Yeah.
look at. It's so incredibly hypocritical because I grew up in a red state too, in Utah, and it was this thing of where obviously I think the maybe not as bad as some other states, the gap, the wealth gap, but it is Mormonism is its own thing. But the reason I say it's so hypocritical is that because when we look at evangelicalism, these people who are very wealthy and then claim Christianity as their moral guide, as their thing, but they're not really practicing it, right? It's what they say to keep the people. It's fiefdom is what it is, right? It's like a modern version of fiefdom. They're your lord liege, and we are all these peasants, and it's like, but our lord liege is telling us no, but you have to follow the way and the rules of God as I am interpreting them and as other people have interpreted them. But I'm gonna go and commit adultery, and I'm gonna go and
the
hypocrisy, right? And so it's like these very wealthy people in these areas, they preach it and they push it on to other people, and yet they themselves are not practicing. So it's that hypocrisy of like I could name so many wealthy people in the communities I grew up in who had an affair scandal or their daughter got an abortion, right? But they were the same people who were like, hey, abortion is wrong and it's murder. But God forbid I can't have my daughter have a kid because then it'll look bad on us, right? Or their son was an awful abuser, right? And yet they were the same people that would be at church on Sunday being like, God, I can't believe this person from this impoverished family did this. How could they? And so it's just, I don't know, it's just such an interesting thing, I feel. And just the way that it's been used to continue that gap, I think, is something that is worthy of like insight and exploration. But I don't know, it just worries me the direction that those in power are taking the country. And I mean, we talked about it at Brew Church, and you said it today, that it does feel like it's this holy war.
Yeah.
And it's such an insane thing that in the year of our Lord 2026, this is still happening. It is, I don't know, it's frightening, and it's so nuanced and it's so hard. I was having a conversation with a friend where she was telling me about her Islamic Palestinian coworker and her feelings towards people, Jewish people. And I was like, I get that, but there's a conflation between Jewish people and Israelis. I'm like, they're not the same thing, like you can't. But then it's like, it's like, who am I to tell this person that you shouldn't be anti-Semitic? Because it's like, if, I understand that connection, but it's also like, I don't know. It feels like everything's getting so blurred, and it's like, how do you, it's walking that fine line of like, I'm critical of Israel, but I have to be careful not to perpetrate dog whistle conspiracies. And I'm critical of Iran, but I have to be careful not to perpetrate dog whistle conspiracies about Islam. And it's so tough.
I hear you saying it's incredibly confusing, stressful time to be alive and to live in this culture and to be a thinking person and wrestle with these matters.
Yeah.
But you are wrestling with them. And that's awesome that you're wrestling with, and that we're doing this together. But it's hard, and we don't get it right. And, let's have grace for each other, as we try to figure out how do we get through this together and be people that enhance human well-being and human flourishing around us instead of inhibiting it. How can we all live more justly and lovingly together? These are the questions that undergird these conversations, really. But yeah, we're up against a lot. These hypocrites, these fucking fascists, the nonsense, the utter nonsense being peddled. I mean, we're up against a lot. Yeah. And I feel that, Jose. I feel you. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Anne, yeah.
I could tell you were about to wrap up, but I snuck it in at the end. Like, as I'm listening to comments and thinking about, like, the fundamentalist theology that is used in poor communities, let's say,
Mhm.
for lack of a better term, that, you know, they're living in what seems like a hopeless situation, and this is something that gives them hope. Although it's deferred hope. Like, they're not given hope for things being better right now, but one day when you're in heaven, all will be made right. It's deferred hope. And then you got the, you know, powerful, we'll just call them powerful, generally wealthy, but the powerful, who their theology is more aligned with God has blessed me. I've worked hard.
Yeah.
God has blessed me. And if you did these things, you would have the same, right?
Yeah.
It's fundamentally the same. It's the same theology in service of power.
Yeah.
So it serves the powerful because they feel righteous in their power, and it also serves the powerful to give people who could revolt, so to speak, deferred hope so they will remain docile.
Mhm.
But it's foundationally the same,
Yeah. Yeah.
or serving the same at the very least.
That's a good observation. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe one more comment? Anybody's got it?
Just think it's so funny that
I just think it's so funny that, like, going along with that, Christianity was a religion that came about to I mean, if you read the text, it was a religion that came about to stop that, right? It was a religion for the poor and the meek and the
For the crucified
oppressed,
ones.
for the crucified ones. Literally, like the guy who we worship was killed by the state
Yes.
because he came and said, hey, maybe people being oppressed isn't right. Maybe people holding all the power isn't right. Maybe we should have community. Maybe we should have love. Maybe we should have acceptance. And it's so funny that that is now become the religion of the oppressors. Like,
Yes.
what a fascinating turn.
You are not the first one to notice that striking contradiction. And you're absolutely right, Jose. And thank you for pointing that out. Bob, did you have something? Or go ahead. I saw you started
I was
first.
thinking like it was important to say, but I suppose it probably is. But one of the things that I just when all this stuff happens and I get so angry, it's been helpful. And it's something that you've mentioned, Aaron, that I feel like I have to come back to the fact that, like, we're in this place here because we won the cosmic lottery to be in the right place, to be in this age here in the United States, in the backgrounds that we came from, as screwed up as they individually are. And that, like, one thing being different could put us on the other side and be in a spot where we didn't have this place of privilege to get here. And, you know, I think about it with, you know, just the escalation and, like, the use of violence to try and solve problems. I'm like, I can imagine that if I was in Iran, it might not be that difficult for me to be radicalized when I watched Americans slaughter children in a school. And I'm like, I get it. It's hard. Like, it's so easy to be angry and forget that there's a reason why, and the systems are set up to be this way. And Vanessa, like you were saying, you know, the difference between the poor and the wealthy and the gap is so huge, and it, like, facilitates things on both sides, right? Like, the wealthy people in power have a reason to stay there, and then the system facilitates, like, vote for these people, vote against your rights that will give you social services and, you know, and healthcare, and, you know, keep yourself as poor as possible by your voting this way. And it's just crazy. It's just, it's just crazy. And I, you know, it's not a thing we get to solve, I suppose, but I like being able to talk about it and be in the spot of wrestling and struggling with it with all of you guys, and hearing Jose bring up movies about how, you know, our life should be infinitely more simple if we could just follow these great filmmakers. And no, but anyways, I appreciate everything that you guys always contribute, and these conversations are my favorite part of what we do.
Yeah, no, I like it when the conversations last at least as long as my talk does. That's good. Okay, well, let's come together. Let's end on a positive note, as we always do, by saying this joint benediction together. Let's say this now. As we go from this place, we commit ourselves to the path of love, honesty, and humility. We dedicate ourselves, as Christ did, to the cause of justice and the courageous embrace of this life, this world, and each other. Amen. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you to all of you who tune into the podcast later. Go in peace. It's my phone number. Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.